Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission is a creature of the Belfast Agreement. It's part of the human rights underpinnings of the agreement, and we are the body that is here to promote and protect the rights of everyone in Northern Ireland. Interestingly and perhaps inevitably, people who are rich and powerful need less protection usually of their rights than those who are marginalised and disadvantaged. So a lot of our work is with marginalised and disadvantaged groups who don't have access to political or economic or social influence. Human rights in Northern Ireland is a contested space. We are involved in issues around dealing with the past, around social liberal issues that have been often resolved through legislation elsewhere but haven't been in Northern Ireland. So abortion rights, issues of equal marriage, LGBTI rights in many fields. And our powers include taking cases to court, either in our own name or on behalf of others. We can do research and education. We can visit places of detention like prisons, immigration detention centres, and we can conduct investigations into human rights issues. Well, if we take the issue, for example, of race, immigration, asylum and refugees, we undertook an investigation in 2012 into race-hate crime. We've more recently done an investigation into traveller accommodation in Northern Ireland, where we found that travellers really faced both discrimination from public authorities and from the general public. But in terms of how traveller accommodation was treated, increasingly it was undermining travellers' ability to their ability to manage their own nomadic lifestyle and culture, because there were overcrowded traveller sites, for example, and therefore travellers were being pushed into either social housing, sometimes against their instincts, or to go into unauthorised encampments, which created other difficulties. So travellers and race hate crime are two examples of where we've taken issues and worked through them. If we take the race hate crime, for example, there are over 1,000 racist incidents reported to PSNI every year. There are something like 660 race hate crimes a year. We know from research that that's the tip of the iceberg, that many people don't report their day-to-day racism that they face. So we know that there are significant race issues, for example, in Northern Ireland that we need to tackle. Well, let's take one issue, which is race, immigration, asylum, ethnic minority groups, for example. Two recent investigations we've done, one into race hate crime. Northern Ireland still has over 1,000 racist incidents reported to PSNI a year, around 660 race hate crimes. We know that's the tip of the iceberg from research, because many people don't report the racism that they face on a day-to-day basis. So we did an investigation to look at how seriously PSNI and public prosecution services took the issue. We found that as a result of our work, there were improvements in the seriousness with which PSNI take these issues, and that's one of the examples of the work we do. A more contemporary one is we've just published an investigation into traveller accommodation in Northern Ireland. It was called Out of Sight, Out of Mind, and that's really what the reality was, that housing authorities, local authorities, really weren't doing the kind of work that we would have expected to ensure that there were sufficient traveller sites in Northern Ireland, that those traveller sites had the kind of services that everyone else takes for granted: water, sanitation, electricity. And there's a lot of work to be done to improve the conditions for traveller sites in Northern Ireland. And what we found was that travellers' nomadic lifestyle and culture was being eroded because travellers were faced with the unpalatable choice of living in overcrowded traveller sites, or being forced into unauthorised encampments and finding difficulties with police and local communities, or they were left with the choice of social housing. Fine for those who wanted social housing, but those who didn't had no other choice, and therefore that undermined effectively the culture that travellers, a very rich and vibrant culture. there's some areas that are particularly distinct to a Human Rights Commission. We are a national human rights institution, and therefore all our work starts from international human rights standards. The UK government has signed up to a number of UN standards on the Convention on the Rights of the Child, for example, the Convention on Elimination of Racial Discrimination, the Convention on Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. There are a number of key treaties, and the UK government is periodically tested, if you like, through the UN as to how they are achieving the things they say they will do under those treaties. One of our jobs is to go to those hearings, present written and oral evidence. So the UK government, for example, presents its view of how it's doing, and we, and sometimes human rights NGOs and others, present our views on how they're doing, and those are often quite different. So the UN treaty work is very important to us. The UK takes its human rights very seriously on the international stage, sometimes doesn't like having a light shone in its own backyard. But we work from the global back to the local. We would work, for example, with local community groups. We sponsor an event at Refugee Week, for example, Small Worlds, where we bring together public figures, Prison Ombudsman, for example, last year, to hear at first hand what life is like for those who are awaiting asylum decisions. I've spoken at events on Housing for All, a grassroots human rights organisation, participation and practice of rights, looking at the housing conditions of asylum seekers, and we've been very supportive of that work. So for me, it's about connecting local issues on the global stage and making sure that everyone understands that we should all be treated fairly and without discrimination in Northern Ireland, whatever our circumstances.